Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February session of Dr. Spotfire. Today, we're going to be doing streaming visualization tips and tricks. So as a quick reminder, our slogan is learning is not driven by answers, but, but by questions. And your Dr. Spotfire crew for 2020 is myself, Neil Kanungo, Nanad Saway on our customer success team, and Jamie Russell, who is our campaign coordinator and architect. A quick reminder, we have new doctor sessions that we're running from TIBCO. There is Dr. Data Science. There was a great first session, inaugural session last month where they talked about even just general data science capabilities and data science topics like k-means clustering. And then they went into some more conceptual things on deep learning. So for those of you that are trying to continue your journey from Spotfire and visualization into more advanced analytics, I really recommend the Dr. Data Science. And those of you that are more in the reporting world, Dr. Jasper is another great session. So that's going to be on the first Thursdays of every month. Dr. Data Science is on the third Wednesdays, and Dr. Spotfire will continue on the first Tuesdays of every month. Okay, now on to today's session. So again, I'm your host, and today I'm going to be doing streaming visualization tips and tricks. This is going to be a little bit unstructured. I'm just going to show you some various tips from things that I've picked up while working with streaming data and Spotfire. So what I have right here is it is just some simulated data. This is just an elevator that we were working with an elevator customer, and they had the status of the doors, the front door and rear door in the elevator. And so I just kind of simulated this by creating a quick feed simulation in Streambase and TIBCO Streaming, where you can go to File, Connectivity Wizard, and you can feed in any type of CSV that you want here. We talked about that in a previous session. There's also a couple videos on YouTube on this. But I just created a basic simulation for this door status. And I wanted to show you that, using Spotfire, you can actually use images as labels. So now on the right here, I'm showing my door status, the current door status. For, if the door's closed, those are closing. If they open, the doors will open. And the way I've done this is I've just gone, and you can add calculated columns to your streaming source. So I added a calculated column, and I have here, a couple images. Let me pull this up on the web for you. So I have like an image I have on the web. You can use images that are also on your local drive, but this is an image I have for door open and an image I had for door closed. And what I have is if the rear door, if the field is open, then show one of the images, otherwise show the other image. And I created that calculated column for both the front door and the rear door. Now, next I went into a map chart. And so I'm going to do this from scratch here. And I removed all my layers. So I'll just remove all these layers. And then I added a marker layer with elevator data. And here for positioning, this is something I'm going to show a few times in today's session. With our streaming data, we now have a new dimension to work with. We have time dimension. And you can do a lot of new things with your visualizations because you have time to work with. So what I'm going to do here for my coordinates is I'm going to just put any fixed value. I can put like 0 in there and 0 in here for this marker. And you would never really do this with another map chart because it would just put all your points on top of each other. However, with, again, streaming data, these points are going to constantly change because new rows are coming in. So I have just one point here, and then I'll go to labels, and I'm going to grab, for instance, my front image, which is that URL, and I'm going to render this as an image, and I need to make this my last value. So the last value that is in there, and I'm going to put it on the center, and then I'm just going to increase the size of this. And it's really just that simple. So the last value that is coming in for front image will get shown there, and you can get now changing images for indicators, lots of different things you can do with this. Okay, Next, let's move on to another example, and I'm going to show, all right, so this is some flight tracking data. And so what we have is actually these really affordable radio receivers set up in our Boston, London, and Gothenburg, Sweden offices. And these radio receivers can pick up a wide band of radio signals, including things like cell phones that are nearby. What we have here are plane transponders, so we can actually see planes as they're coming into the Boston airport in this streaming visualization. So I want to start with some basics here on visualizing streaming data. So here I have aircraft speed for the different aircrafts. Now, it's really important, you know, when you have your scales, a lot of times they'll be set to automatic. And what that means is that the highest bar is always going to be consuming the full length or width of your visualization. So you're not really going to see that moving. So what you really want to do when you're using like bar charts, line charts, and streaming visualizations is you want to fix your axes. So I want to fix the minimum at 0, and I can fix the max here to, like, let's say 400. And then you'll actually be able to see these moving a little bit better when new data is coming in. And I also add labels. So it looks like that 400 I said was actually a little too low. So that's actually off the chart there. So you want to find a good interval to set a good range to set your axes. So I have this at 600, and now you can actually see these moving. And I also have labels shown there because these values can be very close together, and so you can actually see that they're changing a little bit more with the labels. So that's a very key point to make sure that you do. The other thing is I wanted to talk about using document properties and making these parameterized. So what I have here is a line that is the altitude warning level. When a plane drops below a certain altitude, just give me a warning. And I have these colored by the altitude level and its relativeness to the altitude warning level. So if I move this altitude warning level, you'll actually see this line moving around, and you'll see all the colors actually change on the charts here. So if I put it down to 0, you'll see that all change to light colors. So this is the same as when you're using at-rest data, but you can create document properties, so file document properties, and in properties, you can create something like altitude warning. So I created a new property here. You would go to new, type the name of it, and then whatever data type it is. So this is a real value. So I created that for altitude warning. And then I created in my text area a slider control, which you can do from the property controls, this little checkbox. And so for the slider, this will move the altitude warning however I'd like it. So between 0 and 900 or 9,000, I have this numerical range. Okay, so then I need to tie this to my charts and my visualizations. So in this visualization, in the layers on the flights, I can go to settings and colors. And what I've done is I've used a custom expression, and I've put in the altitude warning. So you can right click on, let's search for this altitude. Yeah, so you can right click and insert as value, and whatever value is in that slider is going to be the document property value, and that's going to be my red color. And I also added one for adding 20%. So 1.2 times the altitude warning will give me just 20%. And I was able to add kind of a medium orange color there. And so whenever I move this, it's going to adjust these scales of these colors. And then similarly in this chart in properties, I added a line and curve, and I added a horizontal line, and I went to custom expression, and I added that as, again, my altitude warning document property. So that's how you can make this a little interactive, and you can kind of set some thresholds here to view streaming data as it's coming in, and you can actually see this all kind of dynamically changing with the colors and with the time. So next is I wanted to show you a really cool way where you can, because again, the data is changing with time, I can do something like here, this is a little bit difficult to show because it just depends on if the data is coming from the planes, if they're actually moving. But what I have is a single flight that I can select, and I have the satellite imagery for the whole flight path. And let's see if I can find a good flight here that's moving. That's probably not moving. Yeah, here we go. So this one's moving. So now I am only showing the latest point, and you can kind of see whenever the new data comes in that this is actually kind of moving. It's actually keeping the point in the center, and it's moving the map in the background. So rather than moving my data around, my data is actually fixed, and my reference, which is the map, is moving behind it. And so all I needed to do for this is, I have my my satellite imagery map layer. I added a custom layer in there, and then I needed to have for my flight pointer. So I had my flight pointer, and in settings, I can go to show and hide items. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later as well. I'm going to just show the latest value. So here, I'm taking it by the maximum of the last received time, and I'm showing the top one value. So only show the latest value. Now, if I didn't do this, if I didn't show the latest value, you're going to get everything on top of each other. And you might even try, in streaming data, you do have the option to control the time windows. So you can limit this to a range. And honestly, the way I was initially doing this is I would try to limit it to like 1 second or something. I try to limit it to something that was really tight window. But you can see like in the past 5 seconds, there hasn't been any new data for this plane. So there's nothing showing there. And also you might have a couple data points that come in over a few seconds, and you'll get that kind of ghosting effect. So if you're only trying to show the latest value or the latest few values, I recommend using the show hide items and then adding the rules to show it that way. So you would add it for, again, the last received time, the last value of the last received time, or the maximum, and then you would show the top however many values you want to keep in there, and that will allow it to show the only the last points. Let me turn off this as well. Only show the last point there. And that's similar to what I did here with this heading indicator. I had an image in the background, and I just showed the last value over here, so we can kind of see the angle of the heading indicator. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to another analysis. Okay, so this is our race car streaming data, and I wanted to show you a few things here as well. So I have this reference behind here. I have this car reference, and I have these colors changing on the wheels for the wheel temperature and the brakes for the brake temperature. So let's kind of do this from scratch. What I did is I did a map chart again, and let's go ahead and remove all the layers here and remove all this. And I'm going to add an image layer, and I already created some graphics here. So I have the car top, and this is just letting me know in Spotfire 10.7 that if you're using an image layer as a background like that, you're not going to be able to do the drag and drop. It's going to set the coordinates reference at none, and that's fine. It's just letting me know that. So I've set the coordinates reference system at none, put this image in, and now I'm going to add a marker layer, and I'm going to add my car data. And for well, let's see. Actually, let's do colors here. Let's start with this. I'm going to do my rear tire, my tire temperature rear right, and I'll show the last value, or let's do the last non-null value. And I'm going to make this a square here, and I need to position this somewhere. So where do I put this? Again, here on positioning, I can choose some fixed values. So what I have is for my X, I have -315, and I'm going to hit enter there. And on my Y, I'm going to hit -108, and I'll hit enter there. And that will, oops, I guess this is a little off. I might need to position this a little bit better. So you can adjust these as you need to. So let's say like -90, and I can move the position of this around as I need to, and that will give me the ability, as I configure this, to kind of place it on top of the wheel, change the size, make it larger, things like that. And if I want it, I can put a label on it as well. So I can put the, let's just say the rear temperature, right, and the last known value, last non-null value, and I'll center it on there. So that's kind of how I went through and I configured individual markers for each of these wheels. And I just added a new layer for each tire and each brake. So I put that all on top of each other. So it's, again, like having a fixed value. You wouldn't do this with non-streaming data because all your data would overlap. But here it allows me to actually see trends over time by putting it on top of itself that way. What I also did here on this visualization, so this layer, I brought in a racetrack feature layer. That's giving me the racetrack as a reference in the background. And then on my car data here, I've used the ShowHide. You can use a ShowHide Items to show, again, like the top 5 values, the latest 5 values. Or here I've used just like the last 4 seconds of data. And you can color this based off of just the time that's coming in. So I have like the minimum and the maximum. So this is showing the maximum time. And then I used here, I actually did -4 seconds to make sure that's always going to be a constant color scale spectrum right there. The other thing I was able to do is I was able to kind of create this floating kind of box with labels in here. So I have a label box. This is just an image that just says speed and RPM. So I can turn that off. You can see I've turned that off there. So speed and RPM, I can turn that on and off there. And then I can put my speed value in, which is just a marker layer. So positioning, you can go down, you can set exactly where you want that label to be. And then you can just put the labels as centered on the item, and you can show all the labels, and you can make sure that your drawing order, what you want to do is make sure that the timestamp that's coming in, the event time, it's ordered by this, which will make sure that the latest value is always drawn on the top. That's what drawing order is. The higher values in drawing order are drawn later or drawn on the top level. So that's another nice tip, what you can do with having some free floating areas. Now, over here on roll angle, so there's a way you can kind of make an alternating kind of pulse if you want. So what I did is in column properties here, I actually created, let me go to my car data. I created a alternating sign. And what this is doing is it's taking the index ID and it's looking at if that ID is, it's going to divide that ID by 2. And if that's equal to the integer value of that ID, then give it a 1, a positive 1, otherwise -1. And what that means is, like, if I have an odd number index ID, like 457, then when I divide it by 2, I'm actually going to get a decimal value. But if I have, if I have an even number like 458 and I divide it, there's not going to be a decimal value, it'll be an integer. So if the integer value of that is equal to, the integer value of that divided by 2 is equal to the value of that divided by 2, I know that it's an even number, not an odd number. And then I just give it a 1, and then I give it a -1. And I'll show you why I did this in a second. Just to show you real quick with a table visualization, my card data in here. So you can see index ID coming in here. You can see they're all sequential values. So when it's an even number, again, it'll have a positive sign, an odd number, it'll have a negative sign. And then I only had one value for my roll angle. So let me actually bring this back up. Let's look at this. My roll angle, wherever this is, and here is right here. I only have one value. So I wanted to make this kind of a dumbbell visualization that kind of alternated. It's kind of a niche use case, but you might find ways that you want to do something similar with maybe the angle of an oil rig or something like that. You wanted to try to visualize it that way. So I have these alternating signs come in, and minimize this. So then over here for this visualization, I can do where is it? Roll angle right here, this layer, roll angle. And what I'm doing in my positioning is I'm using my alternating sign to say if it's positive or negative. And then I'm just doing a basic trigonometry to exaggerate where that is going to be vertically, right? So I'm using a cosine value of that roll angle to get kind of a y-axis value of these little ends, okay? And it's a little exaggerated here. This is not 0.05 or 0.06 on the angles, but that's giving me now, instead of just a single roll angle value, it's giving me, again, the cosine, which will give me the y-axis value there. And it's alternating. So I'm actually getting, what I'm getting is this shooting back and forth. It's giving me one value up here, and then it's giving me the opposite, which is the negative value with the alternating sign. It's giving me the other one down here. So I'm setting my y and my x that way. So I'm using, tangent for my y-axis and cosine for my x-axis here. So this is actually kind of going all in an arc around the car. And so by doing that and then doing a line connection by connecting everything by the event time, it's actually drawing a line between these 2 points. So it's plotting 1 point there, 1 point here, 1 point there, 1 point here, back and forth, and drawing a line between the two. And on this one, I didn't show this with showing the top rules. I actually designed this before I realized I should do the top rules. So here I could do top 2 values. And when I do that, you won't see this ghosting anymore over there. It'll just show the top 2 values. So it's not a lot cleaner now. And I could do the same thing with my shape. So what I have is separate markers similar to how I did on this chart with these temperatures. So I have a right arrow, and I position that the same as I have, very similar to I have the each of these squares markers position. And then I put a shape. If the sign is positive, then make it an up arrow. And this is on the right arrow. And I have a separate one for if it's on the left arrow, do the opposite, make it a down arrow if the sign is positive. And that kind of keeps those arrows going. And again, I could do the show hide items here to create those rules, and that'll keep these arrows from disappearing. What's happening is there's not enough data coming in. There's only these measurements every few seconds. So that's why these are disappearing. But I could, again, do the rules to make sure that those are always showing, those arrows are always showing. Another tip to point out is, so I typically don't use Gridlines a whole lot in my report style dashboards, but when you're having a lot of values changing over time, it can be really helpful since there's just a lot moving and you want to get a kind of a quick view. I usually don't do it on static data because you can always just hover over things and find the specific value, but that can be a little bit difficult when things are moving around. So you might want to consider putting grid lines in on streaming data. The next thing is this bar chart here. I wanted to point out that because this is the fuel level of the vehicle, and because this is all moving, it actually makes sense just to show a single bar at once. And that's something I wouldn't always think about doing or wouldn't be useful with static data, but I can actually see this kind of as a meter dropping down. So there, I'm going to keep going here. It's useful to compare with reference data. So this is showing me the current car position in reference to the best lap that's been done. And so what I have in my data canvas is I've brought in historical performance data, and that has the best lap data. And what I want to show is actually the difference in the best lap. So I have the current lap distance coming from my streaming car data, subtracted from a different data table, my historical performance data, and the best lap distance. So that means on my x-axis, when I have it over time, it's going to look at the current lap distance, how far is that car on the track, and subtracted by what was the other tables of static data and subtract it. And so I can see a delta of how this vehicle is doing on this lap at this time. I'm going to switch to another dashboard now. So I have oil wells in the Texas region. I have different metrics on like their pressure and their current on the motors, things like that. So I have a KPI here on certain alert values. I've used a calculated value here. One thing I wanted to point out is because rules right here, you can make it so when, let's say, the pressures go, the alerts go above a certain value, like the number of alerts is maybe like above 4 or 5, then it'll change to red. So let me just trigger this by making this 3. And so now you can see that changing. So that's something also to keep in mind. You can kind of make your pages come to life that way. Now, in this equipment view, I have this trending highest pressure well. So there's a lot of wells here, and this is actually even already trimmed down just for illustrative purposes. But if I wanted to, if I had like hundreds or thousands of wells and I just want to see the highest pressure ones, again, you can go into ShowHide Items and show like the top 5 values, things like that. And I have this data window really narrow on 3 seconds, but maybe if it was a few minutes or even the whole day, if you want to see your top trending wells over the whole day, then you'll have that showing here. I have just the top 5 showing here. So adjustable alerts also here, I can create these alerts. This is similar to how I did it with the plain data. So when alerts are above or below, or values are above or below a certain value, you'll see all of my charts changing colors, just like that. So that's similar to my plain altitude threshold. Here's, I think, an interesting thing with, again, streaming data. You have the time as a component. So this is showing all of my wells, and let's say I want the pressure to be right around this line here. So I can kind of see across them very easily, them moving up and down. But what I've done here that's a little different is that these are actually disappearing. These points are disappearing. So I have this over 30 seconds, and I have some transparency set, and I have the color fading to white over time. So if I go to colors here, then you'll see this fading down to like a light color. So you can clearly see with the dark values, the latest values for this. And I also have this sized by the pressure as well. Another way this is useful is if you make it a tiled marker and maybe you do it over a longer window. So in your scatter plots, you can go to your size option, or sorry, your shape option, and you can make it a tiled marker. And so this is showing me, like, let's say I did this over a 24-hour period. This is showing all of really where the band of where everything is operating, all my wells are operating where I want them to operate. But for those that are way above, I can see exactly when that happened, what well it happened, what the pressure was. I can see at 9:32, then I got this value over here. And so that can help me monitor across all of them at once and look for anomalies in my time series data. And you can also put it here in a vertical line. So I have these adjustable alerts set. 1 second. Let me move this up to like 628 or so. All right. So you can also kind of put them all in a single indicator, and you can make this really narrow if you'd like. And that can be a good way to, so if you had just other visualizations on the right side of your page, for instance, you can kind of shape this and size this so you get an indicator for each of these wells. You would want to probably increase the size of these as you need to.
All right, now another thing to keep in mind is how I optimize these data sources. So my sensor data is a streaming source, and you can see it's pretty narrow. I only have like pressure and current and the timestamps coming in, as well as a well ID that's associated with those measurements. I also have a static data table here that's just in my Spotfire DXP, and this just has metadata about the wells, like their latitude, longitude, region, and type. So I can bring these together. I'm going to create a map chart here that we're using for the other visualizations. And here I'm going to go to properties, and let's go into layers. And I'm going to remove this. I'm going to add a marker layer, and I'm actually going to add the master index, the static data in. And you'll see that that's automatically put all of these wells in. And there's lots of wells here in this visualization. But what I can do is I can marker this by the wells. So that's one important thing, making sure I marker it by the wells. And then I can add things from different data tables that are related and have column matches. So my sensor data has a column match, and I'm going to add the pressure value here, and I'll do on the last non-null value. So my aggregation, I'll do the last non-null value, and now you're seeing here just the pressures for the wells that I have data for, and this prevents me from having to bring in all of this same data over and over again in my sensor data. The wells aren't moving, so there's no need to keep bringing in the latitude and longitude in and the regions and all whatever other metadata I have. I just can keep the metadata separate and optimize the streaming data coming in.
Now I'm going to switch to the last example, which is how to do data functions with streaming data. So let me close this. Okay, so data functions and R scripts, Python scripts, they work on Spotfire that has data in memory, meaning the data has been imported into the Spotfire environment. It's not keeping the data external. What you have with streaming data is the data is always left external in order for it to stream in. And because of that, currently, you can't directly do a data function or some, a lot of the in-memory functionality, the functions and stuff and the calculate columns and expressions, you can't do that on the external data. You can, there is another way kind of around that, where here I have streaming data in, and I have, this is for Wikipedia edits around the world. And it's showing where different latitude and longitude of submissions for people have made different edits. And this is coming in real time. This is actual Wikipedia data coming. And then I have an R or a tear data function calculating these contours and heat maps. And so that's being done on the streaming data, and I can hit reload, and that will update this. It might not change very much right now, but that will update any of my data functions that I have in on the streaming data. And the way that you can do this is, so I'll show you my data canvas. This is my Wikipedia edits. It's my streaming data that's external, but I also have this edits on demand table. And what this is like when you add your streaming source, you can choose to import it. So you add it, you can actually choose to import it or put it on demand, and that will bring it into Spotfire's memory. And then you can refresh this whenever you'd like. So what this is doing is taking all the data that's in the live view table from the streaming source. So the typical streaming puts out to a table called the live view table. And it's importing that whole table into Spotfire, into Spotfire's memory. So as long as you don't have like tons of data, you won't fill up your Spotfire memory, and this is fine to do. And what we have here is a reload button. So this is just an Iron Python script that is called refresher here. And it's really simple. So I have table.refresh, and I make table a visualization parameter, or a script parameter, sorry. A script parameter, and I tie it to a data table, and then I point it to my data that's in memory, so the edits on demand. So that's what's been set up here. So it's pointed to that data table, and whenever I hit reload, it'll just reload all the latest data that was from the streaming source, and then it will run the data functions on top of it. So I go to data, let me close this. So I go to data and data function properties. And then you can see these data functions here.
Now, before we wrap up, a couple notes on scaling streaming in the Spotfire web player. So that is available now in Spotfire. You can stream right in the web. We have this document on the TIBCO community with lots of details. There's a PDF attached to it, and I'll put the link in the video description so you can have easy access to this document. But some key takeaways: visualizations are only rendered on the active page of the dashboard. So visualizations that aren't shown in your DXP when you're using your DXP, Spotfire is not going to use any resources to render that. Now, Now, if you have tons of visualizations on one page, that might be something that could consume more resources. You can certainly just balance that with however much hardware you're using, and consider if you want to break that up across different pages. If you're using the web browser and the browser tab for the Spotfire dashboard's not active, then nothing's going to be rendered. So Spotfire is going to intelligently recognize that the web browser tab's inactive and not spend resources rendering those visualizations. Markings and filters do send queries to the streaming source. So if you have many users doing lots of markings and filters, that might be something you want to consider with your hardware. And streaming predominantly uses CPU and not memory. So you might want to use a node a web player node that has lots of cores. It's recommended in this document that you actually use multiple web player nodes depending on what the load is on each web player node. And there's some performance tests and information as well in there. And you can use as many web player nodes and streaming sources as you'd like. So all good notes to consider. Now, lastly, we do have an interactive demo gallery on the Spotfire product page. You can go to interactive demos, and pretty much all the dashboards we talked about today are accessible in this demo gallery, and you can open these right up yourself. You can go and you can click these and you can view these in the web and play with them yourself.